Some news on China now, where the U.S. has a couple of bills moving through the Congress that are very important. House and Senate lawmakers have proposed changing the name of Taiwan's diplomatic office in the U.S. Taiwan's diplomatic offices around the world are often very carefully named to not upset China, because if you have like a Taiwanese embassy in the U.S., that suggests that Taiwan is an independent country, and that is not what's enshrined in U.S. law and in U.S. policy, to believe in a one China, which means that both Taiwan and China are the same, political entity and should have the same ruler. And, again, that's been U.S. policy for a very long time. And so this bill is taking the U.S. another step away from that if it were to be passed. It was introduced in the House by John Curtis and in the Senate by Marco Rubio. And what it would do is urge Taiwan to rename its office in the U.S. to the Taiwan Representative Office. I think the current name is something along the lines of the Taipei, which is the capital of Taiwan, Representative, Economic, and Diplomatic Office in the U.S., or something like that. Very long name to, try to obscure the fact that Taiwan has its own ruling government and everything like that. So these bills are, again, it's not the most critical thing in the world to rename the Taiwan embassy in the US, but it does take the US another step away from the one China policy, from the strategic ambiguity policy, the policies that have kept the US and China out of conflict for years and years and years, and puts us, taking another step in that direction. Now, it may seem unlikely that that's going to pass, and I don't talk about every last bill that, even if it's hawkish, gets brought up by whatever different people in the Congress and everything. However, the House just passed fairly overwhelmingly, or not overwhelmingly, it's actually pretty close. Vote on the America Competes Act. And so if these kinds of things are getting passed, and I believe the Republicans voted against it because they wanted a stronger bill, not because they opposed the America Competes Act. But what it's going to do is authorize $250 billion in spending. 52 billion would go towards domestic semiconductor, 45 million to supply chains, and 160 billion to scientific research. Of course, the U.S. government is just hemorrhaging money right now. Where they're getting this extra 250 billion is completely unknown, and it's all unnecessary. We could actually, have a relationship with Russia or with China where we have mutual trade between the two countries. Yeah, the Chinese government does some bad things to their own people. You know what? The American government does a hell of a lot of bad things to its own people too. And if we're really concerned about human rights, let's talk about human rights in the U.S. and not be so concerned about what China is doing in Xinjiang all the time. Certainly to the point where the U.S. is acting against it and cutting off trade between the U.S. and China because of it. So I don't know, maybe it's possible that those embassy change bills actually do pass, and that could create more real tensions between the U.S. and China. We also have U.S. warplanes circling the Taiwanese island. This happened about 2 weeks ago. On the last episode of the show that we talked about China on, we mentioned that China have flown aircraft in the Taiwanese ADIZ, which is a large chunk of airspace that extends well out into the Philippine Sea and all over the place. It doesn't in any way represent Taiwanese airspace. And so the U.S. responded by flying circles around Taiwan. And again, it's not like the most critical move that the U.S. had made, but it is another show that, we're really close to abandoning the position that, we may or we may not defend Taiwan if China invades, and just outright saying, we support Taiwanese independence and would prevent an invasion of Taiwan if China were to do so. The U.S. is going to kick off the Noble Fusion War Games. These are in the Philippine Sea, and I believe these are just the U.S. and Japan. Then we have the Cope North War Games that are a little bit bigger and are also going to involve Australia, I believe. Yes, the U.S., Japan, and Australia. 2,000 sorties flying all over the place. Guam, and along like the first island chain and everything like this. And so, while the U.S. complains about China doing things in Taiwan's air defense identification zone, the U.S. is constantly carrying out all these drills and military exercises, sometimes in territory actually claimed by China, or right along the Chinese airspace and everything like that. And so there's a complete double standard on this. The U.S. Embassy in the Philippines said that its territorial claims in the South China Sea are non-negotiable. Many of these claims are in direct conflict with Chinese claims. And if the U.S. is saying here that they're going to bat the Philippines claims against the Chinese claims, things could get pretty messy in the South China Sea one day. And to look at the situation in Ukraine where the U.S. builds up all this rhetoric and we say, it's Ukraine's territorial integrity is absolutely essential, and we recognize Crimea as Ukrainian territory and the Donbass as Ukrainian territory, and we say Russia will never be allowed to change territorial integrity of this, that, or the other thing, right? But at the same time, Joe Biden has made it very clear that the U.S. isn't going to go to war for Ukraine. And so it creates a situation where the U.S. is making statements that it has no intention of backing up, right? But then these governments act in ways that the U.S. is going to back up these statements, and it puts them on a collision course with these much larger regional powers like Russia and China. And it creates a situation then where the hawks in the U.S. cry, oh my God, if we don't continue to back our allies, we're losing legitimacy, and everybody's going to realize that we can't follow through with our promises and all these other things. And it could actually put the U.S. in a position where we do the unthinkable and engage in a direct conflict with Russia or China. Or, at the worst, it ends up being a situation like you could see in Ukraine where the Americans are willing to fight the Chinese to the last Filipino, and the people of the Philippines just absolutely suffer because of this. Now, we do have the Philippines buying some anti-ship missiles. They're going to buy $378 million worth from India. And of course, this is pretty significant because most of the territorial claims that the Philippines and China dispute are over islands and reefs and fishing grounds and things like that. And if the missiles could help to the Philippines to enforce those if conflict were to happen.